Sounds good.
Yeah,
All right.
I'll go through Kruger's list of top 10 items, and he really encourages, and I think I would as well, as to memorize these things. That some of them go a little bit in depth, but maybe just taking one or two, committing them to memory, and moving on from there, I think is really helpful. So the first one, number one, is that the New Testament books are the earliest Christian writings we possess. So this is important because these books that we have, the 27 books of the New Testament, stand out. They're distinctive because they're the earliest Christian writings that we possess. So if we want to find authentic Christianity, what it really looked like then and there on the ground, we should look at the writings that were from that period. And this point isn't arguing that these books are canonical simply because they were early. It's just saying that if we're going to look for writings around the time of Jesus and the apostles, we need to find writings that actually existed at this time, and these books certainly do. Number two is that apocryphal writings are all written in the 2nd century or later. So these apocryphal writings are those writings that are not canonical. Gospel of Thomas is a good example of this. So these writings are not included in the New Testament, but they have the similar genres of the New Testament. So they're like Gospels, or they're Acts or letters. But these writings, they constitute an interest and a fascinating source of study in early Christianity. But if we look at their date, we find that they're written in the 2nd century or later. So with the first point being that the canonical writings are from the earliest books, the apocryphal writings are later. Therefore, it shows that they're not authentic because of their later date, is what that point's getting at. Number three is that the New Testament books are unique because they are apostolic books. And this is an important point because the canon is intimately connected with the activities of the apostles. The apostles had the very authority of Christ himself, and the early church recognized that. They recognized that the apostles themselves were the mouthpiece of Christ. And so in the end, the New Testament canon exists because the early church believed that the apostles were speaking on behalf of Christ. So they want to look at those writings in which the apostles imposed on the church, the writings that were written by the apostles, or they were written at the request of the apostles. The early church recognized that this was important. And number four is that some New Testament writers quote other New Testament writers as scripture. This is a big one because the big controversial issue that many skeptics, I guess you could say, lodge against the scriptures is that there was the date when these books were regarded as scripture is way later. But if we look to the New Testament text and we see some authors quoting other authors as scripture, that just kind of flies in the face of that claim altogether. And it debunks it right away because we see, well, the authors of scripture were recognizing that these other writings were scripture. Thus, that claim, it has no grounding. So we can see that they had a canonical awareness is really the important point of number four. Number five is that the four gospels are well established by the end of the 2nd century. So the four gospels are well established by the end of the 2nd century. And again, just the dating of this. So it's end of 2nd century, there's a well established, and that I think that's an important point too, well established. So we look to, at least Kruger brings up Irenaeus, who was an early church father writing around 180 AD, and he's affirming the canonicity of these four gospels. And he's aware that these four gospels are recognized by the church. So in the 2nd century, the church is recognizing these four gospels. And then we look at the contents of those gospels and we see, well, if this is recognized at the end of the 2nd century, there's clear, again, canonical awareness by the early church, which again disproves the claim that the canon was imposed at a later date. And that's maybe a quick note as well. That's one of the things that these top 10 are really getting at, is that the canon was not imposed at a later time or a later date, but it's the mindset of the early church. They're canonical in their thinking. Number six is that at the end of the 2nd century, the Muratorian fragment lists 22 of our 27 New Testament books. So this Muratorian fragment, it contains the earliest list of our New Testament. The fragment is found in the 7th or 8th century, but the content it contains dates back to the end of the 2nd century. Again, similar to Irenaeus's quote from around 180. And we see 22 of the 27 books at this time, which is remarkable.
Yeah.
It shows that the early church it wasn't a free for all. Many claims, especially in the world of the Gnostic Gospels, Gnosticism altogether, will claim that the early church is a free for all, and that no one was agreeing on anything, and it was only the imposition by the Roman Emperor Constantine that allowed the church to win the day, basically. And so their books won the day. But that's just not true. We see that the 22 of the 27 books were there, and they were regarded as canonical. And it shows us that Christians did disagree over books from time to time, and it was a slow and gradual process, which is extremely important. It's a slow and gradual process. I can't emphasize that enough. But there's widespread agreement as well. And if you think about it, it's an organic process. So of course there's going to be both agreement and disagreement. That's how processes of this nature that's how they unfold.
Right.
And number 7 is that early Christians often use non-canonical writings. And this one is many I guess there's many critiques against the canon because of this point, that we do see early Christians quoting, for instance, the Shepherd of Hermes, the Gospel of Peter, the Epistle to Barnabas, to name a few. And it's often used against the integrity of the New Testament canon, again, to show that, see, it's a free-for-all. They're quoting this massive amount of work, and we can't say that one is canonical and one's not. But then I love what Kruger does in this point, because he shows that there's important details that they leave out here. And one is the manner of citation. So how is it that they're quoting these works? Are they quoting them in the same way as they quote Scripture? And we clearly see, no, they're not. And then what's the frequency of their citation? So I list some numbers in my episodes on canon as well, that the frequency of the citation of the non-canonical works is significantly lower than the frequency of citation of the canonical works, which I think is an important point. Number 8 is that the New Testament canon was not decided at Nicaea, nor any other church council. And you're thinking, what? There is a widespread belief that the canon was established at the Council of Nicaea under the influence of the Emperor Constantine. I mean, many Christians, unbelievers, all alike, this is like the main thing. Yeah, the canon was established by some council somewhere. How else would it have happened? Well, the Council of Nicaea, as you and I both know, had nothing to do with the canon. The Christians at this time they're articulating the beliefs about the divinity of Jesus, if we look at the Nicene Creed and such. And that's not to say that we can't look back in church history and we can see that there are certain councils that make declarations about the canon, but they were simply affirming the way things the way that things had already been. Right. They're not determining the way in which they want them to be. So these councils, it's important to note that they didn't create, authorize, or determine the canon, but they were simply part of the process of recognizing a canon that was already there. And so the people and the church played a role in the canonical process, but the role was mere receiving and not determining. Number 9 is that Christians did disagree about the canonicity of some New Testament books. And this point tends to bring a bit of doubt in the minds of many Christians that, oh man, if these books are truly given by God, how is it that they could disagree? Well, it really points back to the organic nature of the process, that God uses in his providence a human process. So it reminds us that the process is one of long, slow, and hard that brought disagreements. But and the canon wasn't given to us on golden tablets by an angel from heaven, as other religions may say. But God, for his own providential reasons, chooses to deliver the canon through normal historical circumstances. And we need to emphasize the humanness of the process. They were given in real time. The books are given in real time, in real history, to real people and to a real church. And so, and if we think about it, spread over different authors, different continents, and different times, we have to expect that there's going to be some disagreement in the process. But we can again point back to the the broad agreement at the same time that 22 books were agreed upon, which is again remarkable. Number 10, the final one that we should memorize, is that the early Christians believed that canonical books were self-authenticating. And this one is a great fact because it really points to the intrinsic value of the canonical books. So the early church appeals to the internal qualities of these books themselves. The books have certain attributes that set them apart as being from God. And this is easy to see if we just if we open our Bibles and we look at canonical writings versus apocryphal writings, Shepherd of Hermes, Gospel of Peter, we see that there's just major differences. There's intrinsic value within the text of Scripture that I think is one that we should hold on to, given the fact that the early Christians and the early church did as well. So the canon we have today is it's not a mechanical process that took place because of political influence, but it's due to the fact that these books impose themselves on the church because of their intrinsic value. We can think of them becoming canonical at the time of transmission. God speaks and they are canon. They don't become so. That's just the very nature of the book, is that it is canonical. So yeah, that's Michael Kruger's top 10. I went through that fairly quickly, but again, you can go. It'd be helpful maybe if you put his link in the show notes, and that way he lists out many different facts of each one of these points. So he's really helpful there.